Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the star of our show, Terry.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Music and Me podcast. I am your host, Terry, and today we're diving into the world of one of the most iconic and influential bands of the 1990s, Nirvana. Now, I'll be honest, this episode has been brewing in my mind for a while. Why, you ask? Well, a few things made me curious about this band. First off, I can't tell you how many times I've seen people walking around in those classic Nirvana smiley face shirts. I thought, okay, what's the deal here? Why not dig into the music behind the fashion? And to top it off, my niece, who's a total music lover like me, even named one of her cats Nirvana. So how could I not do this episode? It was practically calling my name. Today, we're going to take a look at the rise of Nirvana, how they crashed into the mainstream with their game-changing album Nevermind, and the part they played in shaping the grunge movement that took over the 90s. We'll break down some of their key songs, explore the lasting influence of Kurt Cobain and the band on music, and touch on why Nirvana's legacy still looms large today. So whether you're a lifelong fan or just curious like I was, stick around because we're about to dive deep into the world of Nirvana. And I am very excited about this episode because I really want to learn about this band that seems to be everywhere. All right, let's travel back to the late 1980s. Hair was big, neon was everywhere, and in the middle of it all, a quiet little town called Aberdeen, Washington was about to give birth to a band that would shake up the music world forever. Enter Kurt Cobain and Chris Novoselic, two guys with nothing better to do than blast punk rock in their garages and dream of getting out of their rainy, blue-collar hometown. Aberdeen wasn't exactly a hotbed of excitement unless you count the frequent downpours and the logging industry. So starting a band, it was basically their golden ticket to escape. Kurt and Chris clicked instantly over their shared love for bands like the Melvins and punk rock pioneers like Black Flag. So they formed a band, and after a few false starts and some hilarious band names, one of which was Fecal Matter, they finally landed on Nirvana. Why? Well, Kurt thought it sounded peaceful, which was kind of a hilarious contrast to the loud, distorted mess of punk and heavy rock they were cranking out. He was aiming for something more beautiful sounding, though anyone who's ever heard early Nirvana might beg to differ. But hey, irony was always part of Kurt's charm. Their first drummer, Aaron Burkhardt, helped get things rolling, but let's just say he didn't exactly mesh with Kurt and Chris' ambitions. Rumor has it that he was a little too fond of skipping rehearsals and hanging out at bars. So, like a band on the lookout for Mr. Right, they moved on. In came Chad Channing, who brought some stability, but still wasn't quite the drumming powerhouse the band needed. Spoiler, he got replaced too. Meanwhile, Nirvana's early sound was evolving. Loud, messy, but unmistakably them. It was a chaotic mix of punk fury, a little bit of pop melody, and a whole lot of angst. They were part of the underground grunge scene that was bubbling in Seattle, playing tiny clubs like the Vogue and the Central Tavern. While Kurt's raspy vocals and thrashing guitar style were getting attention, Nirvana was still very much the new kids in town. Speaking of Seattle, this is where Nirvana found their true home. It was a gritty, rainy city that was becoming a breeding ground for a new kind of music, grunge. Bands like Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and Mudhoney were tearing it up on stage with their sludgy guitars and raw, distorted sound. Nirvana fit right in, but with their own unique edge, Kurt's songwriting. Even in those early days, his lyrics were deeply personal, full of emotion, and even tinged with a dry sense of humor. Then, in 1990, Dave Grohl walked in, and the rest, as they say, is history. This is the guy who would become Nirvana's secret weapon. Dave's drumming was fierce. He hit the drums like they owed him money, and it gave Nirvana the thunderous, driving sound they needed to break through. Kurt and Chris knew they had found the missing piece. With their lineup solidified, Kurt Cobain's haunting voice and guitar, Chris Novoselic's powerful bass, and Dave Grohl's explosive drumming, Nirvana was ready to take over the world. Well, not yet. First, they had to survive living out of vans, scraping by on tiny club gigs, and putting out a debut album, BLEACH, that would put them on the map. It wasn't a hit yet, but it was enough to catch the attention of the right people. From small-town garages and grimy Seattle clubs to a big label record deal, Nirvana's journey was just beginning. The funny part is, they had no idea how big they were about to become. But we all know what happened next. Nevermind, fame, and a place in rock history. And if you're wondering what really put them over the edge, we'll get there soon. But that's when Smells Like Teen Spirit exploded onto the scene and changed music forever. All right, fasten your seatbelts because here's where the Nirvana story goes from, hey, there's this cool band from Seattle, to holy crap, Nirvana is everywhere. By 1991, Nirvana had caught the attention of some big names in the music industry. After the raw, scrappy BLEACH album, they were ready to take things up a notch. So they signed with DGC Records and teamed up with producer Butch Vig, who would play a huge role in transforming Nirvana's sound into something polished enough for the masses, without losing any of that grungy edge. Now let's pause for a second and appreciate this. At the time, Nirvana was not supposed to become some blockbuster chart-topping band. No one saw this coming, not even the band themselves. Kurt Cobain was famously skeptical about mainstream success, and here they were, working with a major label, getting ready to drop an album. Kurt probably figured, hey, maybe we'll see a few thousand records, do some tours, keep it underground. Boy, was he wrong. Enter Nevermind, the album that changed everything. The opening track, a little song you might have heard of, Smells Like Teen Spirit. And even I have heard of this song. Great song. From the moment those iconic 4 guitar chords hit, the music world was never the same. It was like the bat signal for disaffected youth everywhere. Suddenly, every teenager who felt misunderstood, angry, or just plain bored had an anthem to scream along to. The funny part? Kurt wrote it as a joke. He thought it was just a catchy, dumb pop song. But when the music video hit MTV, back when MTV still played music videos, remember that? I do. I used to watch them. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Boom. Grunge exploded into the mainstream. Smells Like Teen Spirit was so unexpected that not even Nirvana knew what to do with it. The song took over MTV, the radio, and then the world. Overnight, the band that had been playing in dingy Seattle clubs was now headlining massive venues and hearing their song everywhere, from dorm rooms to the grocery store. And let's talk about that Nevermind album cover for a second. You know, the one with the naked baby swimming after a dollar bill? It became one of the most recognizable album covers ever. Side note, the baby, now an adult, even recreated the photo later in life. But this time with a swimsuit on, thank goodness. It was cheeky, irreverent, and totally fit the vibe of the band. Deep, but with a sense of humor. The release of Nevermind and the success of Smells Like Teen Spirit kicked off the grunge revolution. Nirvana wasn't alone. Bands like Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and Alice in Chains were part of this wave. But it was Nirvana who opened the floodgates. The flannel shirts, the unkempt hair, the mix of punk energy and dirty rock riffs, suddenly, everyone wanted to be part of this Seattle sound. It wasn't just about the music, though. Nirvana represented something. They weren't just singing catchy tunes. They were giving a voice to a generation that felt lost, disillusioned, and over the shining plastic 1980s. It wasn't about big hair, glam metal, or synth pop anymore. Grunge was messy, it was raw, and it was real. Kurt Cobain was dubbed the reluctant voice of a generation, a title he was uncomfortable with, but it stuck nonetheless. And while the world went crazy for Nevermind, Kurt, Chris, and Dave were left scratching their heads, wondering how this all happened. They'd gone from playing small clubs to headlining massive festivals, from scraping by on tour to seeing their album leapfrog Michael Jackson on the charts. Yep, Nevermind dethroned Dangerous. So there you have it. Nevermind wasn't just an album, it was a cultural movement. Nirvana had crashed into the mainstream with such force that nothing was ever the same. And whether they liked it or not, they were now the kings of the grunge movement, leading the charge for a generation that finally had its own sound, style, and attitude. All right, so after Nevermind blew up, Nirvana didn't just change music, they changed the culture. Grunge wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a movement. And guess who was at the front of it, whether they liked it or not? Yep, Nirvana. Imagine this. You're just a bunch of scruffy dudes from Washington playing loud, dirty rock music, and suddenly, you're on the cover of Rolling Stone being called the voice of a generation. No pressure, right? But here's the thing. Nirvana didn't try to become legends. They just did. In the early 90s, while everyone was still clinging to glam rock and pop synths, Nirvana came in like a wrecking ball. Cue Miley Cyrus. They stripped everything down, ditching the flashy costumes and hairspray for flannel shirts, torn jeans, and a couldn't-care-less attitude. And people loved it. Grunge was the perfect antidote to the glossy neon vibes of the 80s. Suddenly, looking like you just rolled out of bed was cool, and so was having a bunch of feelings about, well, everything. Nirvana accidentally became the face of the grunge movement, and Kurt Cobain? Yeah, he was not about that life. He didn't wake up one day and think, you know what I'd love? To be the poster child for teenage angst and rebellion. That's exactly what happened. While bands like Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and Alice in Chains were also part of the grunge wave, Nirvana was the one that really cracked the mainstream. And let's be honest, it was because of that one song, Smells Like Teen Spirit. It was the anthem for every kid who felt out of place, confused, or just plain angry. And there were a lot of those kids. Nirvana's influence on alternative rock and the entire mainstream music industry was massive. Before them, alternative music was just that, alternative. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd hear on Top 40 radio. But then came Nevermind, and suddenly alternative rock was the thing. Record labels were tripping over themselves trying to find the next Nirvana, and grunge bands popped up everywhere. It wasn't just a trend, it was a full-blown cultural takeover. Now, Nirvana was never out to become icons. They were just three guys playing music that felt real to them. But something about their raw sound and Kurt Cobain's deeply personal lyrics connected with people on a level that most pop music at the time just didn't. Suddenly, they were more than a band. They were a symbol of rebellion, of disillusionment, of not fitting in. For every kid who felt like an outsider, Nirvana was the band. Their style was a mix of punk, heavy rock, and raw, emotionally charged lyrics. Cobain wasn't afraid to let his feelings pour out in his songs, whether it was about love, pain, frustration, or even his struggles with fame. And the thing is, he wrote in this super poetic but totally accessible way. He wasn't trying to be fancy, he was just being honest. Tracks like Lithium, Come As You Are, and In Bloom showed off his ability to combine melancholy with catchy hooks. And that's what made Nirvana stand out. They didn't care if it was messy, as long as it was real. Kurt's songwriting was unique because he mixed vulnerability with aggression. You could tell he was wrestling with some serious stuff, whether it was his discomfort with fame, his troubled childhood, or his complicated feelings about life in general. He'd sing about these heavy topics, but somehow his music was still fun. And for fans, it was like having a friend who got it, who understood what it was like to feel really overwhelmed by the world. As much as Nirvana wanted to be just a band, they couldn't escape the fact that they were now cultural icons. They represented this sense of rebellion, of sticking it to the man, but in the least polished way possible. They weren't wearing leather jackets and smoking cigars in music videos. They were grunge in its purest form, raw, unfiltered, and totally relatable. Nirvana became the voice for a generation that didn't want to be told what to do, how to feel, or what to wear. They were anti-authority, anti-glamour, and just anti-everything fake. So while Kurt Cobain might have rolled his eyes at the idea of being the voice of a generation, there's no denying that Nirvana left a massive impact on music, culture, and let's be honest, fashion. They changed the game for alternative rock and gave a whole generation a reason to crank up the volume and scream their hearts out. And it all happened without them ever trying to be something bigger. Nirvana was just Nirvana, a band who didn't play by the rules, and because of that, they rewrote them. All right, everybody, I have more to come, but first, here's my interesting fact of the week. Welcome to my interesting fact of the week. It's 1991, and Nirvana's just dropped Nevermind, the album that would launch them into rock stardom and pretty much take over the world. So naturally, there's a big release party to celebrate. Fancy guests, music industry big shots, free food, you know, a classy affair. But this is Nirvana, not your typical band. And when you throw these guys into a classy situation, well, let's just say things tend to go off script. Here's what went down. Kurt, Chris, and Dave, probably already a bit over the scene, decided to spice things up by doing what any self-respecting rebellious rock band would do. They started a food fight. Yep, you heard me. Forget mingling with music execs or politely eating hors d'oeuvres. Why not chuck the hors d'oeuvres at each other instead? Needless to say, the suits weren't too thrilled about their little grunge war, and wait for it, Nirvana was kicked out of their own release party. I mean, how rock and roll is that? Can you even call yourself a true grunge band if you don't get booted from your own party? It's kind of perfect if you think about it. While Nevermind was busy revolutionizing the music world, the band was busy turning a high-profile event into a chaotic mess. That food fight, it's almost a metaphor for the band's ethos, taking something polished and mainstream and throwing some mess into the mix. Nirvana did it with their music, and apparently they did it with their party behavior too. So the next time you're at a fancy event and you get the urge to toss a canapé at somebody, just remember, you're not misbehaving, you're channeling Nirvana's spirit. And now back to our episode. Welcome back, everybody. So, after the Nevermind explosion, Nirvana was a household name. But if you thought Kurt Cobain and the gang were going to settle into rock stardom with a smile, think again. With In Utero, their 1993 follow-up, they basically said, all right, you liked Nevermind? Well, buckle up, because we're about to take a sharp left turn. In Utero is like the gritty sequel to Nevermind. Less Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back and more Mad Max Fury Road. If Nevermind had the polished sheen of radio-friendly rock, In Utero came crashing through the front door with raw, abrasive, we don't care what you think energy. The sound was jagged, messy, and unapologetically unpolished. This time around, Nirvana teamed up with producer Steve Albini, a guy known for his love of raw, live-recorded sound. No overproduction, no gloss, just loud, in-your-face rock. And that's exactly what they got. In Utero was heavier, more chaotic, and more intense than its predecessor, like a sonic punch in the face. And that's not a coincidence. By this time, Kurt Cobain was not enjoying fame, like at all. The media had turned him into a reluctant rock god, and he hated it. The attention, the rumors, the pressure, it all became too much, and In Utero was his way of lashing out. It's an album filled with introspection, anger, and frustration, as Kurt basically flipped the bird to the world and poured all of his complicated emotions into the music. Let's talk about the songs, because In Utero might be raw, but it's also full of genius. Take Heart-Shaped Box, a song that's both cryptic and hauntingly beautiful, with that eerie guitar riff and lyrics like, I wish I could eat your cancer when you turn black. It's classic Cobain. Poetic, weird, and totally unforgettable. The song became a massive hit, even if it was like nothing else on the radio at the time. Then there's All Apologies, which might be the closest thing In Utero has to a ballad. It's reflective, bittersweet, and feels like Cobain taking a moment to step back and reflect on his life. You can feel the exhaustion in the lyrics. He's trying to reconcile fame, family, and his own mental state. It's like he's offering an apology to the world, but also kind of saying, but I'm not really sorry. And of course, we've got Rape Me. Yeah, Cobain wasn't pulling any punches with this one. It's a song that's both shocking and provocative, dealing with themes of exploitation and control, which Cobain felt on a deep level with the media's relentless attention on him. It's not a song for the faint of heart, but it's a powerful statement, and it captures the no-holds-barred attitude of In Utero. So, how did the world react to Nirvana's sonic middle finger? Well, In Utero was a bit polarizing. Critics were split. Some praised its raw power and honesty, while others found it too abrasive and too challenging. But that's exactly what Nirvana wanted. Kurt was done with chasing mainstream success. This album was for him, for the band, and for anyone who wanted to dive into the murky depths of their music. Commercially, though, In Utero still crushed it. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts, proving that even when Nirvana tried to push people away, fans were still there, hungry for more. The album didn't have the same mass market appeal as Nevermind, but that was the point. It wasn't supposed to. In Utero was Nirvana's way of saying, we're not your polished rock heroes, we're flawed, frustrated, and this is who we really are. It was messy, loud, and filled with emotion. And in the end, it's that unfiltered honesty that makes it one of the most compelling albums in rock history. Nirvana didn't just break the mold with In Utero, they smashed it to pieces. When it comes to rock legends, Kurt Cobain is a name that will forever loom large. He wasn't just the frontman of Nirvana, he became the voice of a generation, a reluctant rock god, and ultimately a tragic figure. Cobain's story is one of musical genius mixed with the weight of personal demons, both of which contributed to his lasting legacy. Fame wasn't something Kurt Cobain sought. In fact, it was the last thing he wanted. He was just a guy from Aberdeen, Washington, who loved punk rock and making music with his friends. But when Nevermind blew up, suddenly he was everywhere. On magazine covers, MTV, and posters plastered on teenagers' walls. And for someone like Kurt, that kind of spotlight wasn't a dream come true. It was a nightmare. Cobain battled with depression and addiction throughout his life, and the pressures of fame only made things worse. He felt trapped between the expectations of fans, the constant scrutiny of the media, and his own personal struggles. The pain was there in his lyrics, which were raw, personal, and full of angst. But behind the music was a man who was quietly unraveling. Kurt's drug addiction, especially heroin, became more severe as the pressures mounted, and despite attempts to find peace, his internal battles became too much. In April 1994, the world was shaken by the news of Kurt Cobain's death. He was just 27 years old, joining the infamous 27 Club alongside legends like Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison. Cobain's death by suicide rocked the music world and left fans devastated. Here was a man whose music had resonated so deeply with a generation, who put into words what so many felt but couldn't express, and now he was gone. Fans mourned the loss of someone who had become more than just a musician. Kurt Cobain was a symbol of rebellion, of fighting against the norms, of not fitting into the mold the world tried to place him in. His death was a reminder of the toll that fame and mental illness can take, and it sparked conversations about depression and addiction in a way that hadn't been seen before. Despite his tragic end, Kurt Cobain's legacy has only grown stronger over time. He wasn't just another rock star, he was an artist who changed the way people thought about music, culture, and themselves. His lyrics, often introspective and vulnerable, connected with fans on a deeply personal level. Cobain wasn't afraid to be real, and that authenticity made him a legend. As a musician, Kurt's influence is undeniable. He helped bring grunge to the forefront, blending punk rock with heavy, distorted guitars and making it cool to be loud, messy, and imperfect. His songwriting was simple yet profound, and he had a knack for writing hooks that were both catchy and emotionally powerful. Tracks like Come As You Are, Lithium, and Smells Like Teen Spirit are still anthems for misfits and rebels everywhere. And it's not just the music that cemented his legacy. Cobain became a cultural icon. He represented a generation that felt disillusioned with the world, frustrated by the status quo, and misunderstood. In Kurt, they saw someone who felt their pain and gave them an outlet to express it. He didn't want to be the spokesperson for anyone, but his music spoke volumes. In 2014, Nirvana was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, an honor that highlighted the lasting impact Cobain and the band had on rock history. Even though Kurt wasn't there to witness it, his presence was felt in every speech, every tribute, and every fan who still carries his music with them. Kurt Cobain's influence didn't fade after his death, it only grew stronger. From fashion to music to pop culture, his presence is still felt. Whether it's a new generation discovering Nirvana for the first time, maybe through those iconic Nirvana t-shirts, or musicians citing Cobain as an inspiration, Kurt's legacy is very much alive. In the end, Kurt Cobain was more than a tragic figure. He was a groundbreaking artist whose impact on music and culture will never be forgotten. His life was short, but his influence, that's forever. It's been decades since Nirvana first exploded onto the scene, but their influence is still everywhere. From stadium anthems to bedroom posters, Nirvana's fingerprints are all over the world of music and beyond. Let's dive into how the kings of grunge continue to leave their mark, paving the way for future artists, new genres, and showing up in the unlikeliest of places. When Nirvana burst onto the scene with Nevermind, they didn't just make music, they reshaped it. Their unique mix of raw, distorted guitar riffs and emotional honesty tore through the mainstream, and suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of that gritty alternative rock pie. Without them, we might not have the same thriving alt-rock and punk scenes we know today. Take the punk revival of the late 90s and early 2000s, for instance. Nirvana's punk meets grunge vibe was like a crash course for these pop-punk pioneers, who carried forward the energy and rebellious attitude, but added some catchy hooks to make it their own. And let's not forget Foo Fighters, aka Dave Grohl's second time around as a rock legend. After Nirvana, Grohl swapped the drumsticks for a guitar and mic and formed the Foo Fighters, a band who would become a force of its own. Grohl's evolution from drummer to frontman is practically rock history in itself. And without Nirvana, who knows if we'd ever have gotten The Pretender or Everlong blasting through our speakers. Then there's Pearl Jam, a fellow grunge heavyweight. While they had their own unique style, the explosion of Nirvana helped elevate Seattle's entire grunge scene, which propelled Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and Alice in Chains into the mainstream alongside them. But Nirvana's reach goes far beyond the flannel-clad 90s. Even today, their music still finds a way into films, TV shows, and video games, like a cool uncle who refuses to leave the party. From the rebellious drums of Smells Like Teen Spirit in every high school misfit scene ever, to the haunting melodies of Come As You Are, scoring introspective moments on screen, Nirvana is still the go-to soundtrack for anyone looking to add a little edge to their story. Remember when Thor Ragnarok came out and Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song had everyone headbanging in theaters? Well, imagine Teen Spirit being that for every generation of rebels. The song is an instant vibe. Need to feel like you're sticking it to the man? Pop on some Nirvana. Want to feel deep, moody, and misunderstood? Cobain's got you covered. Even newer generations who didn't grow up during the grunge explosion are discovering Nirvana's raw, powerful sound and loving it. The band is like the perfect worn-in pair of jeans, timeless, cool, and never out of style. It's always fun when a younger generation discovers something their parents grew up with, right? Nirvana is no exception. Thanks to the ever-growing trend of throwback tees, you know you've seen those iconic smiley face Nirvana shirts everywhere like I have. Nevermind and In Utero continue to gain fresh ears every year. And the beauty of it? Kurt's emotionally raw lyrics and Nirvana's gritty sounds still hit home, even for teens in the 2020s. The angst, the frustration, the search for meaning, it's universal, and that's why Nirvana's music never feels dated. Nevermind and In Utero still get shout-outs as some of the best albums of all time. Rolling Stone, Pitchfork, you name it. They're still ranking high on every greatest albums list out there, and for good reason. Whether you're discovering Lithium for the first time or throwing on Heart-Shaped Box for the 500th, the music continues to resonate. Even outside of rock, Nirvana's influence sneaks its way into unlikely genres. Take modern alt-pop artists like Billie Eilish. While her sound may not scream grunge, her dark, introspective lyrics and minimalist production often echo that raw honesty Cobain was famous for. And in the realm of pop-punk, bands like Paramore and Fall Out Boy have cited Nirvana as influences, showing just how far-reaching Cobain's guitar riffs have traveled. Nirvana may have been a band of the 90s, but their legacy stretches well into today. They weren't just a flash in the pan, they were the torchbearers for a whole new wave of rock that refused to play by the rules. Whether through the bands they inspired or the lasting presence of their music in pop culture, Nirvana continues to be a symbol of rebellion, creativity, and raw authenticity. So whether it's on a high schooler's playlist, in a blockbuster movie, or through Dave Grohl's endless rock crusade, Nirvana's influence isn't going anywhere. Long live the grunge. As we wrap up this deep dive into Nirvana, it's easy to see why they're still considered one of the most iconic and influential bands in rock history. They didn't just make music, they made statements. Their songs captured the raw emotion and rebellious spirit of a generation, and that's why they continue to resonate with fans old and new. Whether it's Kurt Cobain's deeply personal lyrics, the band's gritty, unapologetic sound, or their ability to shake up the music industry, Nirvana is a band that never fades. They defined grunge, challenged the norms, and became a voice for those who felt like they didn't fit in. And honestly, who doesn't love a band that says, hey, it's cool to be different? So if you haven't already, this is your official invitation to go back and revisit those classic albums, Nevermind, In Utero, even Bleach, and let yourself get lost in the music. Reflect on how much they shook things up and how their impact is still felt in rock, punk, alternative, and pretty much every rebellious sound out there. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of The Music and Me. It's always so much fun exploring these musical legends with you. And I hope this Nirvana journey has been as fun for you as it has been for me. Next week, we're shifting gears for our Broadway-themed episode of the month, and I'll be talking about the great Lin-Manuel Miranda. That's right, Hamilton, In the Heights, and so much more. You won't want to miss it. Until then, keep the music alive and come as you are. Peace out, everybody. This has been the Music and Me podcast. Subscribe now so you don't miss a beat.